You have good trips, you have bad trips.
Was that he had a pentagram tattooed to the center of his head.
Because I had to pick my friend up from an insane asylum who was literally in the exorcist bed.
This lady is able to get a hold of the dead.
Seeing people's faces melt off.
He kept talking about a razor shower. This stuff is real. So what's up, man? Tyler?
Chilling, man.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about something that has been around for a while, but in our day and age is very prevalent. I actually learned about this recently, just the idea of on TikTok and other platforms, just how popular just the idea of tarot cards and crystals and a lot of things that go with just the spiritual world and spirituality in general. And so I'm glad to kind of dive into this with you. One of the things I'd like to talk about, maybe to kick us off, is, a lot of things like this historically for Christians, we've, as a church, had tended to be very reactionary and sort of like, no, that's foolish, or that's wrong, or evil, or whatever, like, stop it, goodbye, like, and instead, I think what we want to do here at Sandals Church is have a conversation about some of those things. So any thoughts just kind of as we get started?
Yeah, absolutely. Just going off what you said of, we want to have a conversation about it and not just throw up the judgy, how dumb can you be to look at the stars? We're talking about people who want to be fulfilled spiritually. And is that not what we're all doing as Christians? We're being fulfilled spiritually. We have physical needs, emotional needs. We also have spiritual needs that are being met. So wherever we go with this, I just want to start off with a level of respect for people that are doing this stuff who don't call themselves believers or Christians, because they're trying to fulfill a need that God has created them with, sure, which would be spirituality. Yeah. And I think so often that's where the conversation starts and it stops right there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that we're starting there because, I think that one thing I've learned is that, and we'll come back to this later, but that the Bible has a category for this kind of thing, and so I love that there's this sort of common starting point that we can have this same page kind of idea that we are all looking for something,
Absolutely.
and obviously we go to different places, which is why we're having this conversation, in terms of the source or where we're looking to find those things, but for sure, I think for starters, we very much affirm, you would say, that we're spiritual creatures. Right. The way I like to put it is that there's more to reality than meets the eye.
Amen.
Right? Even Jesus over and over again, he's telling stories about very everyday, normal things, but the people don't get him because he's actually using those stories to point them to a reality that transcends the physical, and so I think that these are waters that we're comfortable swimming in conversationally, and so have you ever had any experience yourself, like just personally engaging tarot cards or crystals or
all of the above. The one that comes to mind was when I was living in Denver. I had a roommate for about 2 months who was working on his dissertation, so super smart dude. Had a lot of answers, and he read tarot cards on the weekend. Just kind of one of his side gigs, I guess, a little side hustle. And, we were drinking all weekend and doing God knows what. And he finally asked me, do you want to have your tarot cards read? And I grew up in the church, and, I had done everything at this point except tarot cards. And there was something in me, from whatever my my upbringing was, it was like, no, don't do it. But then I was like, yeah, let's do it. So I remember sitting in the backyard, and it was cool. And then he put them all out. I can't remember exactly how he did it. And he started to flip them one by one. And he just described my past and, shortcomings. Yeah. Shortcomings, doubts about myself, like major sins, major, mistakes that I made in my life. And it was just a really negative kind of reading about me and about my future, and I wasn't following Christ then. I was in total, rebellion. And I remember sitting there at this table and just feeling this surreal, experience. And it wasn't the booze, it wasn't the drugs. There was a line there, and he was telling me stuff that he didn't know me.
It was accurate. You're
It
saying
was
even though
accurate.
it was mostly negative, it was still accurate.
It was still accurate.
Wow.
And it was scary, and it was kind of depressing. Yeah, it had kind of a depressing feel to it, I mean, with it being negative.
Yeah.
And I was baffled by it because, I wanted to dismiss it,
Sure.
but there was truth, there was honest to goodness truth that was told to me from that.
Yeah.
And it was a surreal experience.
Which is actually kind of interesting for me because I've never experienced tarot cards specifically, but as I was like looking into this in preparation for this conversation, one of the thoughts I actually had, and I've thought about it with like fortune cookies before, is it seems like it's always good news,
Right?
Like, and I don't know if it was your buddy, so he felt like, oh, you got a bad one. I guess you're not paying me. So
Yeah, that could be
I'm
it.
safe to give you some bad news or whatever.
We
but,
were roommates though, so
Yeah, sure. But I was struck by like the cards that I was seeing pulled in the TikTok. It was all good. Like all the messages were good news, which I was like, well, doesn't seem representative of reality necessarily. But yeah, have you? One of the other things that I've experienced. I want to say I've forgotten a lot, but and I'm getting older. But I want to say I had an experience once with some. I don't know if it was my cousins or what, but with a Ouija board. There was a game back in the '80s called Bloody Mary that you'd play in the bathroom. So I was a child. Like I didn't know what was going on. It was kind of I knew that I had this sense experientially as a kid that something's like dark about it.
Yeah.
Like something's not quite right.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a framework to sort of interpret it with, and so it was funky. It was weird. It was kind of scary a little bit, but also intriguing and piqued my curiosity or whatever. But the one thing I do know that's part of this, I'd call this sort of overall trend, and what I'd call like just a thirst for things of the spirit, of the thirst in our culture for spirituality that we've already spoken to. But it is also just the use of psychedelic drugs to open up the mind, even for healing in some cases. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, even the guy who read my tarot cards, the dude's working on his dissertation. It's a smart man. He's, lived 10 years in books. Like he is gaining a massive understanding of the world around him, yet there's this thirst and desire to figure out things that, that are missing in him. And then, you take it a step further into psychedelics, and that's what I was doing. And you get to this point of almost cockiness in this like language that we use of like, oh, we're gonna go leak, we're gonna go trip, we're gonna go journey, and we're gonna go search. Like it felt like a search always. And we're searching for something, and you have good trips, you have bad trips, you have all that stuff. But the thing that happens is you keep doing it because you're still searching for that thing, right? So again, I think it's spirituality, but it's not within the bounds of which we were created. So it would be the same as me going out to, McDonald's and eating 30 Big Macs. That's physicality, just not within a sustainable bound in which I'm created. Yeah. And that's the beauty of Christianity, is God has a framework for us to experience spirituality in a way that not only fulfills that, but grows us and makes us better and, brings us towards Him.
Sure. You talked about seeking something, and I think that's even that language is spiritual language, right? What would you say you found? Like in the most like, what did you find as you open yourself up and were looking for something?
Man, that's a great question. Mystery and wonder, and I think that's a huge, huge thing that we don't have in society today, is wonder and mystery. And even in, and as Christians, I feel like we don't fully lose ourselves in the wonder. And there's this desire of wonder and spirituality because, dude, I'll drive, I'll drive to work and I'll connect with God and feel God's presence in a 50 Cent song, And it's not a worship song per se, but somehow spiritually there's something that's happening. And, there's a spirituality to what we have. And what it does is it shows me the multi-facets of God, how vast and wonderful He is. Sure. So I think in that, when we would take, acid or mushrooms, we'd go up into the woods, and it was always a natural experience, get in touch with Mother Nature, or see where we began, all that. all that stuff, and really we're seeking the wonder of the universe.
Yeah.
And you can't contain it.
And it's interesting that astrology is actually looking it's looking to the stars.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, in the ancient world, that's what brought awe and wonder.
Yeah.
And I mean, for all kinds of actually like very practical, physical reasons even.
Right.
With urbanization, I mean, a lot of us live in cities.
Yeah.
And the ambient light drowns out
Right.
stars, right?
Right.
And so you got to get away. You
Yeah.
got to go somewhere special, you know, and to really be able to just see the stars, right? And I think that's a teaser maybe a bit to kind of a crucial distinction, especially for Christians, which is the same wonder and awe and mystery and even smallness. I mean, philosophers talk about the numinous, which is this category that's transcendent, that we feel small and yet safe in. All of those kinds of things are what we would say as Christians are actually hardwired in us. It's the longing of the human soul to reach out for something that's bigger and almost even causes us to tremble a little bit, you know? And yet the confusion, we would say, is when it's misplaced.
Yeah.
And the object of that awe, that reverence, that worship, that mystery becomes the creation, not the creator, you know? And so within the Christian context, all those things are meant to be part of the wonder and the beauty. They are creations of God.
Yeah.
And they're meant to sort of point us to the one who's behind them as the artist.
Yeah. So I mean, so what you're saying is just in the bones of Christianity, all that stuff, that spirituality is hardwired there, and has an outlet that's healthy and is good for us.
Yeah, for sure. I got to tell you a story. You know, I too did some psychedelics. For the most part, I wasn't looking for something. I was a stupid teenager. And like, there's plenty of people out there who I could look back on it and say there were some deeper things happening. Like I was wanting to feel different for certain reasons, and discovering what those were part of a later healing journey with Christ. But yeah, just I want to tell you a quick story about encountering in a very profound way something spiritual that I sort of stumbled into this experience. I was actually visiting a friend that I'd met, a guy who was a Vietnam veteran, and I'm pretty sure he was an alcoholic. He was lost, and he was living in a facility for people who are both chronically homeless and have a mental health diagnosis. And he needed a ride. He was on the other side of town, didn't know how he'd gotten there. So I took him back, and I was like, man, I really like just love this guy in our short ride to this place. And I said, man, I want to come back and visit you, and we can chat some more. And man, if you need anything, let me know. I'll bring it to you, whatever. And so I went back to visit him, and I noticed this guy there was an outside patio area, and there were some people sitting out there. So I was meeting with my friend that I met, and he kept walking up to people, and he'd get right up in their face and say, can I ask you a question? And most of the questions he'd keep asking were, do you have a cigarette? He was trying to bum a smoke, man. And so people would give him like a little like their butts or whatever was left or whatever. But this guy was there was something that was I was really, really curious about this guy. And what I noticed as he was having conversations was that he had a pentagram tattooed to the center of his head.
Okay.
And so I didn't think too much about it because I was trying to be present to my friend in this conversation. And my friend says, hey, you want me to like go give you a tour of the space? I'll show you my room, where I live, stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, sure. So we go inside, and he gives me a little tour, and we're about to come back into like the inside area, like the lounge where a lot of the people were like watching TV or playing board games or whatever. But before we came through the double doors, this guy with the pentagram came up right into my face, man, and his breath was not pleasant. Trying to put that kindly. Just kind of some gnarly teeth, big old beard, kind of a scary looking dude. If you ran into this guy in the alleyway, you'd be tripping. Yeah. And he gets right up here and he says, can I ask you a question? And I said, yeah. And I'm going to leave his name out. I'll call him John to keep him anonymous. Out of the blue, he says, what happens to the bully John in the end? That was his question, right? And I don't know. I know that this was a spiritual moment for me. I mean,
Yeah.
I interpret this as a Christian. This was the Holy Spirit.
Give me the heebie-jeebies, man.
Gave me some. Oh, it's not over yet. Gave me some words, like without thinking too much. It wasn't a processed moment. He asked the question, and here's what came out of my mouth. I said, "In the end, I believe that the proud will be humbled, and the humbled will be exalted." And he kind of stepped back for a moment, and I think he was probably just so used to people dismissing him because they see him every day, and he's always getting in their face, asking for a question, if you kind of, bumming a smoke, whatever. I think so. Some of it was probably just, oh, like you actually like responded to the question I was asking. And it he almost took a step back and was sort of, I don't know, threw him for a loop in kind of a thoughtful way or whatever. And then again, this was not premeditated. I responded then, I said, can I ask you a question? And he said, sure. And so what I left out in context was when we were out on the patio, he kept talking about a razor shower. So that had happened before this exchange. Okay. So when I said, can I ask you a question? He said, yeah, sure. And I said, where are the razors coming from? And I'm this man with a mental health diagnosis who was clearly ill. He wasn't well in his mind. Sort of snaps out of whatever that condition is. And as clear as day, as normal, and as cool as the other side of the pillow, he just goes, the razors are all the insults of the people. Look at me, I got a pentagram tattooed to my head. And in that moment of clarity with this man, not only did I have what I consider the compassion of Christ in my heart, I just broke. Because here's this man who's caught up in this, he just said, the razors are coming from all the insults of the people. Like, look at me, My heart just broke, and in that very moment, one of the orderlies burst through the doors and was like, "You can't be back here," and he snapped right back into wherever he was. So we just had this pure moment, very spiritual, that I believe was inspired by God, and it was very real. And so that's my story, man.
Man.
And yeah, any thoughts on that? I know you had one you wanted to share as well.
Well, yeah. Well, that's a great story. And it gives me the heebie-jeebies, because, I know what that feels like. And why do you think that stuck with you so much over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way he physically manifested a distinct demeanor. I mean, one of the words you'll hear out there in the TikTok world or whatever, as you look at some of these feeds that they're talking about crystals and whatever, like aura, right? The feel, the vibe, the energy. These are all sort of synonymous words that people use. His countenance is an old one, right? Like just his demeanor, whatever. It just shifted in a moment.
Yeah.
And I could it was as clear as day. Anybody else who would have been there would have seen whoa, something changed. Whoever. This John character is the real him, buried beneath the mental health, buried beneath the pentagram tattooed on his head, was this man who was hurt, had been hurt over and over again by the words of people. And I think it broke my heart. And I think that Christians normally would, not just Christians, let's be fair. Yeah. Anybody that saw this guy on the street would step off the sidewalk and walk the other way. They would respond. It's like the I'm not a Disney fan, but the Beauty and the Beast, this man with this face, and I think it was God revealing his compassion for this man, John. Yeah. But there was clearly, to the point of our conversation, there was clearly some other dimension or level, whatever word we want to use to describe this spiritual reality. Yeah. That we are thirsting for, this spiritual, just that there was something going on there, more than met the eye. Yeah. More than the physical.
Yeah, and I think that's great to kind of springboard into what the rub is with all this stuff that we see on TikTok and, this kind of new agey feel with psychedelics and crystals and all that, is what we're presented with is the nice side, the beautiful side. And you talked about what I ultimately found. What I ultimately found was the ugly side, because it is endless seeking. It's torment, because it's humanity. It's the human condition where you're never satisfied. And so, I have several bad trips that snapped me out of it. One of the reasons I'm a Christian today is because I had to pick my friend up from an insane asylum who was literally in the exorcist bed and couldn't speak, couldn't say his name for 3 days just because he had a bad trip. And so, these trips, I had a trip where I felt like the whole universe was falling in on me, and I was going to go insane, and I was never going to be sane again. There's so much stuff with this stuff that has a pretty face of, it's just crystals, it's just it's just signs, it's just psychedelics, it's just drugs. It's not. There's a certain level of danger in there, and I think speaking to the people who are kind of not Christians, and maybe on the fence, they're not telling you the full story when they're selling you this stuff. There's a whole backside of side effects.
Sure.
And maybe you could speak directly to the Christian who's, starting to dip the toes in this. But what I found ultimately was torment, because there's no satisfaction, and there's darkness, and there's things that would, happen in trips. There's things that I would hear,
Sure.
And there's still these feelings that I get to this day where I'm like, ooh, you can sense things a little bit where it kind of freaks you out.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. I think it's a perfect segue. I just wanted to point out, this is for Christians and non-Christians, some really interesting things that we find in a text that's thousands of years old, right? That speaks directly to what we're talking about.
Go figure.
And so, go figure that there's some relevance here, and that the Bible isn't silent on these things. And so, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, actually doesn't have a lot of this dimension, quite honestly. There are some, we're going to look at them, but the clearest version is the opening chapters of Job. We get this figure called Satan. Is a Hebrew word that literally just means the accuser, and it peels back the window of what we'd call maybe the heavenly realm, like the spiritual realm, and shows this sort of scene between God and spiritual beings, created spiritual beings, one of whom is this character, Satan. Obviously, we have the story in Genesis, the serpent that represents Satan as well. But I wanted to point out this crazy story in 1 Samuel, which is where you get the closest thing to, I think, a story, a narrative about these kinds of things. This is 1 Samuel chapter 18, 8 through 11. It says, Saul was essentially jealous of King David. People were singing songs about how heroic he was, and how he'd killed thousands. Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. And so it says, this made Saul very angry. What's this, he said. They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands? Next, they'll be making him their king. So from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. The very next day, a tormenting, you use the word torment, a tormenting spirit from God overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave in his house like a madman. David was playing the harp as he did each day, but Saul had a spear in his hand, and he suddenly hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall. David escaped him twice. And so that's some context.
Yeah.
So Saul, 10 chapters later, the side effects have kind of taken full course, right? 1 Samuel 28, verse 4. The Philistines, which was the enemy army, had set up their camp at Shunem, and Saul gathered all the army of Israel and camped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the vast Philistine army, he became frantic with fear. I actually think, just to pause there for a moment, I think a lot of our searching is inspired by existential angst.
Oh, absolutely.
And fear, and we're insecure. Our souls are fundamentally insecure. We don't have any grounding. We don't have a center.
Man.
And so it leads us to seek.
Yeah,
right?
That is a great point.
This is exactly what happens with King Saul. And he's maddened. There's already a spirit involved here. He says, he asked the Lord what he should do, but the Lord refused to answer him either by dreams or by sacred lots or by the prophets. So what did he do? He went his own way. And he said, he said to his advisors, "Find a woman who is a medium, so I can go and ask her what to do." His advisors replied, "There is a medium at Endor." That even sounds like
Yeah.
sounds like it's out of that sci-fi whatever.
Yeah.
The medium at Endor, the witch. Some translations actually call her the witch at Endor. So Saul disguised himself by wearing ordinary clothing because this was against the law of God. If you go back to Deuteronomy, it's clear that God says don't do this, right? Saul knows this. He knows the word of God. He's the king of Israel. He does it anyway. That's why he's disguising himself. And he says, "I have to talk to a man who has died." This is literally what you'll see this on TikTok. Like, you'll see some of the messages coming from the dead.
Yeah.
Trying to reconnect emotionally people who are struggling with loss. They're sad, they're grieved, they're angry. And so he does this. And here's the crazy thing. They actually, this lady is able to get a hold of the dead prophet of God, Samuel, to get him to talk to Saul, right? So again, to our point, this stuff is real.
Yeah.
Right? And the question is, I think ultimately comes back to like where we're looking, where we're going, where we're seeking, and what we're going to find.
And the motivation behind it too. I mean, the motivation that took Saul and made him change his appearance and become somebody else to go seek and find.
Sure.
I mean, there's levels to that right there, man.
We could break that down for a while.
Hours on that.
For sure. And this isn't just an Old Testament or Hebrew Bible thing. A couple other quick passages. This is Acts 16, verses 16 to 19. Paul and Silas are going out. They're spreading the word of God. They're spreading the good news of Jesus Christ. And in chapter 16, verse 16, it says, "One day as we were going down to the place of prayer, we met a slave girl who had a spirit that enabled her to tell the future. She earned a lot of money for her masters." Mm-hmm. Let's talk about motivation.
Right.
Right?
Boom.
Like you said it, your buddy was a side hustle.
Yeah.
He was making some coin, right?
It's not, school's not cheap, man.
So yeah, motives aren't totally pure.
Yeah.
But she earned a lot of money for her masters by telling fortunes. She followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God, and they have come to tell you how to be saved." I want to point something out here that's a biblical theme as well. Like, these spirits recognize true, like they recognize truth. Mm-hmm. They recognize like that there is one source, that there is a light, and it's the light of God, the one true God, the Most High God. These spirits recognize that. We see that when Jesus in the Gospels encounters demons. They know who he is.
Yeah.
He actually shuts them up because he doesn't want who he is revealed quite yet.
Right.
Because his time hasn't come.
Right.
And he knows if he was revealed, he'd die, and he's going to eventually die, but he's got some work to do before that happens. And so, I mean, even it says the demons know that there's a God. Demons are theists.
Yeah, which is just so BA.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Demons
really
are
is.
theists. Trip on that. I've never thought about it quite that way. But and then so she calls them out. "These men are servants of the Most High God, and they have come to tell you how to be saved." Like, she even
Dude.
like she's speaking truth.
Yeah.
This went on day after day until Paul got so exasperated that he's another translation says he just got annoyed.
Yeah.
Like her constantly kind of messing with him, that he turned and said to the demon within her, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And instantly it left her. Her master's hopes of wealth were now shattered, so they grabbed Paul and Silas and dragged them before the authorities at the marketplace. Like, this was a racket, but the what was making her money was real.
Yeah.
It was a spirit, an evil spirit, a demon, that was actually speaking some truth.
Right.
That then got rebuked.
Right.
Right? Like,
and then once it was gone, there was consequences for that spirit being gone.
Yep, that's right. So, yeah, I just want to kind of say, as a pastor, just to Christians and non-Christians alike, you know, if you play with fire, you're going to get burned. And so while I believe that we are all wired, we're all created in the image of God, with a deep longing that at the end of the day, you spoke this in your own experience, was not all the other places you went looking as a seeker.
Correct.
You came up empty.
Yep.
Right? And so that we are wired to find our home in God. And in fact, there's a way we're all trying to get home.
Yeah.
And that home is a spirit, and it's the Spirit of God. That God is spirit, and that's where we're to find Him. And what we also believe as Christians is that we live in a fallen world, and some of these spirits have gone their own way in the same way that King Saul did. And the New Testament actually gives us a way to test spirits. Like if you're on TikTok and you want to know if something's of God, like there's a way to do that. This is from 1 John chapter 4. I'm going to start in verse 1. Dear friends, do not believe everyone who claims to speak by the Spirit. You must test them to see if the Spirit they have comes from God. For there are many false prophets in the world. This is how we know if they have the Spirit of God. If a person claiming to be a prophet acknowledges that Jesus Christ came in a real body, that person has the Spirit of God. But if someone claims to be a prophet and does not acknowledge the truth about Jesus, that person is not from God. Such a person has the spirit of the Antichrist. It's not of Jesus, which you heard is coming into the world and indeed is already here. And so I think the litmus test, to translate that, the litmus test is Jesus. Is the spirit you're interacting with, conversing with, summoning through whatever means, is that spirit a spirit that acknowledges the truth of who Jesus is? And if not, man, I just say stay away. Like, just to be super clear, I think it's very dangerous, man, to mess around with this stuff, and you can find yourself in a place that's very dark.
Yeah.
That brings a whole lot. I love the language of side effects.
Yeah.
They aren't on the fine print in the commercial.
Yeah, and the home that you've talked about, and the what we're called to as Christians, that's the light, and there's no place for darkness and light, and the side effect is bondage. And so I'd encourage you to not fool yourself that any form of bondage is freedom, and anything that's outside of that light is bondage. No matter what it looks like on TikTok, man. There's a million filters, It's all perceived. And so that warning that you gave, I amen that 1,000 times over.
Cool. So we just want to say thanks for joining this conversation, Tyler. Thank you for chatting this up with us. I think it's been a great conversation. Yeah. And I just want to say from my heart as a pastor here at Sandals Church is that if you've ever had a spiritual experience that you just don't know what to do with, maybe it's even sort of you've had some of the darker stuff, the scarier stuff, and you just don't know what to do with it. And this conversation about the reality of those things has caused you to ask some questions about some things that you've experienced in your past. Man, drop a comment. We'd love to continue the conversation with you, and we're about walking with people as they seek what they're looking for, which we believe is the light of Christ. So God bless you guys. Thanks for joining.